Hi everybody, I'm Canchen. I'm one of the lead CAs for this course, and in this first lecture, we'll be going over an introduction to Rust. And more specifically, we'll cover why are we teaching Rust, why are we learning about Rust in this course, and then we'll talk a little bit about how to install Rust on your computer, and we'll go through a simple Hello World program. In addition, another good resource is the Rust book, which is basically a website that has that goes over the basics of Rust and how to use it and get started. And it's a really good resource for getting started learning Rust, but it's optional. So first, let's talk about what is Rust. So Rust is oftentimes described as a multi-paradigm programming language. And when it comes to classifying programming languages, we kind of think about programming paradigms as the type of a language. So in this case, Rust is mainly imperative, and imperative is languages like C and C++, where you write sequences of statements, and each line of code runs one by one, right? So it's just some sequences of instructions for the computer. But it also has elements of functional programming. So Rust, for example, has iterators, these algebraic data types, etc. It also has some object-oriented programming, and through traits and generics. So it's has a lot of different types of features also synthesized together into one programming language, right? So Rust is most commonly used for systems programming, where systems programming is basically low-level code that supports other software running on your computer. So maybe that could be the operating system, or maybe device drivers, or maybe networking code or other backend stuff like that. But surprisingly, Rust is very general purpose as well. People have used it to build command line applications or even web applications. And to get maybe a better idea of what is possible with Rust, you can look at all the past final projects that have been done for this course, right? So Rust is a very general purpose programming language. Although it's well suited to systems programming, it actually is able to do a lot of different tasks. So let's talk about a few reasons why somebody might want to use Rust. So maybe the most iconic reason is Rust's memory safety and thread safety. So Rust has a very unique ownership and borrowing model on how it deals with memory to prevent classic memory errors that occur all the time. So in CS 128, you'll probably learn about how to use malloc and free. Oh shit, it's new and delete in C++, right? But you have to manage memory manually in C++. You have to be very careful about, okay, I'm allocating this memory and I have to remember to deallocate it later. But Rust's ownership and borrowing model gets rid of that, so it prevents that it prevents you from making these kinds of mistakes. In addition, the compiler is also good at catching common concurrency errors, where you're having a multi-threaded program and there might be race conditions, etc. A second important part of why somebody might want to use Rust is that Rust has very good tooling. The documentation about the Rust language is very readable. It's pretty new and updated. The compiler always gives useful messages as to where your code is failing to compile. Oftentimes it'll point out the line hey, you need to the errors on this line, and it'll even give you a suggestion just change this and your code will compile, etc. And then the third reason is that Rust has a very good integrated package manager and build tool, Cargo. So this basically lets you build your Rust projects and import libraries, etc., all in one, and it's very convenient. So maybe in C++ you'd have to use make files or CMake, and it's this whole separate thing, and there's many different competing standards. But in Rust, everything is handled through Cargo, so it's a very convenient and productive language. So to install Rust, you should go to the official website and follow their instructions, because it might vary depending on your machine, etc. But in general, for Mac and Linux, you can run this command. It'll basically download this rustup file and then install it to your computer. Or for Windows, you can just download this rustup init executable, right? So again, these are pretty standard methods, but you should defer to looking at the website for seeing how to install. So during the installation process, what is actually happening? So you're installing this tool called Rustup, which basically installs and manages the tool chain for Rust, which includes a bunch of different smaller programs, right? So let's first explain a little bit about what is a tool chain. So when you have it's a set of tools to turn your project into an executable. So when you write your project, you end up with a bunch of source files, right? But these aren't actually runnable by the computer yet. So you need a compiler to compile the source code into machine code like assembly or something like that can be like run by the CPU, right? And then it'll also include the build tool and the dependency manager. In this case, it's Cargo, right, that we talked about on the last slide. And it will install like other related like softwares to basically like help you bring your project from like the source code to like a finished project that can like be run, right? And the reason we want a tool like RustUp is because Rust is like constantly updating with new versions, and if you want to keep and manage like different versions, this RustUp tool is basically in charge of that. Now we'll go through a quick demo on how to start a new Rust project. So here I have an empty folder, there's nothing in here. And the way we can start a new Rust project is we can run cargo new, I believe. Oh, and then it wants to provide a name for the project. So let's call it like hello world. So now if we look here, we've created the hello world directory. And if we peek inside, we see it comes with this cargo.toml file and like this Rust file inside the source directory, right? So this toml file basically contains like metadata on like packages needed to like build your like program. So that would include like what kinds of libraries you're using. And then the main file we're interested in is this main file. So let's go to this hello world directory and we can edit this main file, right? We can see it just says hello world, right? The way we can run this program now is we can use cargo build to compile it into an executable, or even better, we can, so we see it just like compiled it right there. We can use cargo run, which will do the compile, which is basically like does cargo build and then runs the finished executable. So it will like compile it first, and then it'll run this like executable that was generated, and it basically prints hello world to the terminal, right? So this is pretty much the whole setup, right? We run cargo new to create a new project, and then we can use cargo run to like run the project, right? When we want to run our code. The last thing that you might be interested in installing is if you're on VS Code, you can install this Rust Analyzer extension. And this is basically like language server protocol for Rust. And why you might want to install this is basically it works as like IntelliSense if you work for other languages, and it basically comes with like autocomplete and it will detect errors in your code, etc. So basically this thing will run in the background and analyze your Rust code and tell you when there are errors. So it's a pretty useful thing to have. And if you're using like a different code editor that's not VS Code like me, you can install this somewhere else. I'm sure you'll be able to figure it out, right? So that's pretty much it for how to create a new Rust project and get started after you've like installed RustUp and Rust on your machine. So that's pretty much concludes the lecture. And then as for announcements, remember to fill out the onboarding form on Discord. And if you have trouble with installation, you can come to office hours, and we have times for office hours posted under resources. So that's all for this lecture, and thank you for watching.